It was one of those evenings where I'd been counting the minutes at work, ready to shut my laptop and get home. A vendor meeting had wrapped up ahead of schedule, and for once, traffic had played nice. I pulled into the driveway nearly an hour earlier than usual. There was no reason to expect anything unusual, just the quiet predictability of a midweek evening. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Not bad, not dramatic, just a subtle shift in the air, the kind you notice without fully knowing why. I set my briefcase down in the entryway, and that's when I saw them. Men's sneakers. Not my size, not my brand, not anything I'd ever seen before. Black, a little scuffed around the toes, soles still faintly marked with damp street grit. I stood there for a moment just looking at them, the way you stare at an object and try to make it fit into your version of reality. A friend's? A delivery guy's? My mind sifted through the possibilities, but none of them sat comfortably. I moved deeper into the house. The faint smell of something savory lingered, garlic, olive oil, maybe basil, but there was no sound of cooking. The kitchen lights were on, though, and when I stepped in, I found 2 plates of pasta on the counter, neatly plated but untouched. The steam had faded. The sauce had settled into the ridges of the pasta. 2 wine glasses stood next to them, each holding a half-pour of red wine that had already lost its chill. The sight was strange enough, but it was the stillness that made my stomach tighten. If this was meant to be dinner for us, why was it just waiting? I glanced toward the bathroom. A faint dampness in the air caught my attention, and when I stepped in, I saw 2 towels hanging side by side on the rail. Both had that heavy, recently used dampness. Neither was mine. One was a pale green we kept for guests. The other a white bath sheet that Claire usually reserved for herself. I touched the corner of one, cool to the touch, but not yet dry. Back in the kitchen, I noticed a small stack of mail by the coffee machine. On top was a thin slip of paper, a courier receipt. It had our address printed clearly, but the name was unfamiliar. Not a neighbor, not a friend. My brain filed the detail away without jumping to conclusions. I heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of Claire's voice calling out, light and casual. "Mr. Early Bird, you're home already?" She appeared in the kitchen a moment later, hair a little tousled, cheeks flushed. If she was startled to see me, she didn't show it. She glanced at the plates and glasses on the counter as if she'd been caught in the middle of a pleasant secret. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," she said, slipping into a bright, almost rehearsed smile. "I was setting up for later. The contractors finished their work ahead of schedule, so I thought I'd thank them with a little dinner. We've been talking about celebrating, remember?" Her tone was smooth, her pacing steady. She didn't over-explain, just enough to paint a picture without inviting too many questions. Then she pivoted, as if she had rehearsed the transition. "And speaking of surprises, I've got something big planned for you soon. You're going to love it." It was a neat maneuver, shifting the spotlight away from the scene in front of me and onto some undefined future event. The way she said it, all warm and conspiratorial, you'd think I'd stumbled into the setup for my own birthday party. I didn't challenge her. I didn't ask about the sneakers by the door or the damp towels or the name on the courier slip. Instead, I smiled lightly, nodded, and let her steer the conversation toward this mysterious, upcoming surprise. Inside, though, my mind was already filing and cross-referencing. The sneakers, the towels, the cooled pasta, the wine glasses, the courier receipt. Details that, taken alone, could all be harmless. Taken together, they felt like something else entirely. Claire moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, straightening the counter, casually sliding the courier slip deeper under the mail as if it were just clutter. She poured herself a splash of wine, sipped it without looking at me, and asked about my day. I answered in short sentences, careful to keep my tone level. If she noticed my eyes wandering, scanning the room, she didn't mention it. I was already rehearsing how I would remember everything exactly as I'd found it. The arrangement of the plates, the angle of the glasses, the placement of the receipt. I didn't need a confrontation that night. Confrontations invite explanations, and explanations, especially rushed ones, tend to reshape the truth. What I needed was clarity, and clarity doesn't come from an argument in the heat of the moment. When she stepped into the hallway to take a phone call, I quietly pulled out my own phone. A quick sequence. Photos of the kitchen counter, a close-up of the sneakers, the towels, the courier slip. I even noted the time and the exact order in which I'd seen everything. By the time she came back, the wine in her glass was gone and her smile was easy again, as if nothing about the evening had been unusual. We sat down for dinner. Not the pasta on the counter, which she said was for later, and talked about small things. Or rather, she talked and I listened, storing away every detail like a man keeping an account ledger for reasons he can't yet explain. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room and scrolled through the photos I'd taken. Nothing in them was definitive. Not yet. But together, they felt like the opening line of a story I didn't want to read, but couldn't afford to ignore. I decided then, no scene, no accusations. Not tonight. Just watch, remember, and wait. The days after that evening didn't explode into anything dramatic. No shouting matches, no slam doors, no smoking G***N revelations. If anything, Claire seemed a little sunnier, as though she thought the story she'd given me had landed exactly the way she wanted. But when the house was quiet, and I had a moment to think, I kept circling back to those first details. It's strange how once you notice one crack in the wall, you start finding them everywhere. I began mentally rewinding the past months, holding each small, previously forgettable moment up to the light, and patterns emerged. The first was her location sharing. We'd had it on for years, not because either of us was obsessive, but because it was convenient. Picking each other up, knowing when the other would be home, even coordinating errands. About a month before that Thursday, hers had gone dark. She'd brushed it off when I mentioned it, saying her phone had glitched after an update. I'd believed her. Why wouldn't I? Her phone itself had started behaving differently too. Not technically, but in how she handled it. It lived face down on the table now, on silent, even when she wasn't in a meeting or on a call. If I walked into a room, she'd finish whatever she was doing on it before turning the screen my way. Once, I caught a quick flash of her home screen, 2 messaging apps I didn't recognize, buried in a folder named Utilities. There were the evenings blocked out on her calendar, marked only with vague placeholders: personal, meeting, studio. I'd assumed she was using the time for her art classes or volunteer work, but when I compared dates later, some of those studio nights lined up perfectly with unexplained cash withdrawals at ATMs near boutique hotels and fitness studios in parts of town we never visited together. Her spending left other breadcrumbs. Credit card statements showed 2-person restaurant bills on days she told me she was grabbing a quick smoothie after a workout. The amounts didn't match smoothies. They matched entrees, desserts, and good wine. Our shared laptop began showing guest logins in the user history. At first, I thought it might be some background update or a sync issue, but the timestamps were odd: late nights, early mornings. Always when I was out of the house. One afternoon, our neighbor stopped me at the mailbox and asked if we'd gotten a new car. "I keep seeing a little gray coupe pulling into your driveway late at night," she said, smiling as if it were some fun surprise. I shook my head, told her she must have mistaken our place for someone else's, but inside I was cataloging the detail. A coupe, gray, late at night. Even her family had shifted in small ways. Claire's relatives, usually polite but reserved toward me, started carrying themselves with a kind of quiet confidence when we crossed paths. It was subtle, an ease in their body language, a faintly knowing look when Claire's name came up, as though they were waiting for some change they already knew was coming. Once I started seeing the pattern, it was hard to stop. Even her silences seemed loaded. She'd go quiet at dinner, her gaze slightly unfocused, like she was halfway in another conversation happening somewhere else. When I'd ask, she'd smile and say she was just tired, or thinking about a project. I didn't confront her about any of it. Not yet. I just started making a habit of recording. Quietly, privately. Bank statements downloaded to a secure folder. **TS of calendar entries. Photos of receipts left in the trash. Nothing accusatory, just information. At night, when she was asleep, I'd sit in the living room with the soft glow of my laptop screen, arranging the details into a timeline. It wasn't about feeding paranoia. It was about building a clear picture. I told myself that if I was wrong, I'd have the relief of knowing it. If I was right, I'd have the facts to back it up. And somewhere along the way, the question in my mind shifted. It wasn't, is something happening? Anymore. It was, how long has it been happening? And how far has it gone? I replayed conversations from months earlier with fresh ears. The times she'd been at the gym, but came home without a workout bag. The weekend she'd canceled our plans because she wasn't feeling well, but later posted a photo from across town. A street she claimed she hadn't been near in years. The way she'd brushed off my offer to join her at one of her weekend art classes. Insisting it was just me time. The more I remembered, the clearer the story became. Not definitive yet, but coherent. There's a kind of mental fatigue that comes from living in suspicion. You learn to keep your expression neutral while your mind is busy cross-checking times, places, and words. You smile when she tells you about her day, but you're also mentally matching it against the map of her recent transactions. You nod when she says she's meeting a friend, while noting the exact time she leaves and how long it will take to get where she's supposedly going. I catch myself wondering how many people were in on it. Did her friends know? Were they covering for her? Was the gray coupe his? One night, as I was locking up, I stood in the doorway and looked at our home. Not the furniture or the walls, but the life inside it. It still looked the same. It still sounded the same. But I couldn't shake the sense that some part of it had already been quietly dismantled, piece by piece, while I wasn't looking. I didn't know yet what I'd do when I had enough proof to be certain. All I knew was that the certainty was coming. Until then, I'd keep collecting the pieces. My birthday fell on a Wednesday that year, and Claire had been uncharacteristically insistent about how the day should go. No errands, no plans, she said the night before. Just stay home and relax. I've got a surprise for you. I agreed easily enough. After all, surprises were supposed to be good things. But the past weeks had trained me to take even the smallest instructions from her with a pinch of suspicion. That morning, she left early under the pretense of running last-minute errands. She kissed me on the cheek at the door, her eyes bright in a way that felt almost rehearsed. "Don't peek around the house," she said with a mock warning tone, "or you'll ruin it." Around noon, she texted to say she'd be home in the late afternoon and that I should be ready by 6. But something about the timing didn't sit right. 6 hours was a long time for errands, especially when most shops we frequented were within a 15-minute drive. By 3, the walls of the house felt like they were closing in. I tried reading. I tried answering work emails. But my mind kept circling back to the gray coupe, the blocked-out calendar entries, and the little tells I'd been collecting. By 4 o'clock, I made a decision. I'd leave just for an hour and come back earlier than she expected. If nothing else, it would clear my head. The streets were quiet, and my drive was aimless. I bought a coffee I didn't really want, then looped back toward home. Pulling into the driveway at 5:07, I noticed right away. The gray coupe, parked in front, engine cold. Inside, the house wasn't silent. There were faint noises, muffled voices, the scrape of a chair. I stepped into the kitchen and stopped dead. A man I'd never seen before was standing there in loungewear, holding a glass of water. He froze like a deer in headlights, eyes darting toward the hall as if calculating the nearest exit. On the counter next to him sat a small pile of mail, and on top of it, a plastic key fob with the logo of a local fitness club. The name printed on it, Trevor. On the back of one chair hung a shirt I recognized immediately as Claire's. Loose cotton, the kind she'd wear on lazy Sundays. I didn't say anything to him. I just let my eyes take in the scene. Beyond the kitchen, the bedroom door stood ajar. Through the gap, I could see a partially open suitcase, clothes folded neatly inside. Definitely not hers. On the nightstand beside the bed were 2 identical bracelets, still in their little boxes, tags attached. Claire appeared in the doorway seconds later. Her expression flickered from surprise to something harder to read. An awkward mix of guilt and damage control. "You're early," she said, as if that explained everything. I stayed where I was. Clearly, Trevor shifted awkwardly, muttered something about needing to head out, but didn't move toward the door. The air between the three of us was taut, heavy with the awareness that there was no plausible script for this moment. My gaze drifted toward the corner of the kitchen ceiling, where one of our smart home cameras was mounted. I thought about the app on my phone, the logs it kept. I checked them before for routine things, package deliveries, maintenance visits, but never with this level of personal stake. Later that evening, after they were both gone from the room, I pulled up the feed. The data didn't lie. 2 separate motion detections that morning. Claire entering with Trevor at 10:14 a.m. Both leaving together at 1:42 p.m. Returning again just after 4 o'clock. There was no room left for speculation. This wasn't a coincidence, or a misunderstanding, or a friend crashing for the night. The surprise she'd been planning wasn't for me. It was about him, his presence in my kitchen, his suitcase in my bedroom, the bracelets on the nightstand. I didn't lash out. Not right then. Instead, I took mental snapsh*ts the way I had with the sneakers and the towels weeks earlier. The exact angle of the suitcase lid. The brand of the cologne I could smell faintly in the air. Sharper than anything I owned. The faint trace of her perfume layered over it. The half-empty bottle of wine on the counter. A different varietal than the one she and I usually drank together. Trevor left first, mumbling a goodbye without meeting my eyes. Claire stood in the hallway for a moment afterward, as if deciding whether to explain or wait for me to ask. "I was going to tell you," she said finally. I didn't respond. My phone was still in my hand, the camera log open on the screen. I tilted it so she could see the timestamps, the entry and exit records. Her shoulders dropped. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed at the reflex, at how automatic that line must be for people in her position. But there was no point engaging with it. Instead, I walked past her into the bedroom, took another slow look at the suitcase, the bracelets, the small stack of receipts on the dresser. The top one was from a cafe halfway across town. Timestamped at 2:10 p.m. Right between their 2 recorded appearances on my camera log. Every piece clicked neatly into place. There are moments when denial evaporates so completely it's almost physical, like a heavy fog lifting to reveal a sharp-edged horizon. Standing there, I realized I'd reached that horizon. The questions I'd been turning over in my mind for weeks were no longer questions. The surprise was here. I'd walked straight into it, and I had exactly what I needed to move from suspicion to certainty. Once the shock wore off, and it wore off faster than I expected, my thoughts turned not to confrontation, but to preservation. Whatever Claire said or didn't say at that point no longer mattered. The only thing of value left in the situation was the truth, and truth has a way of evaporating if you don't trap it quickly. That night, while she took a long shower, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and phone, building a quiet case. First, the smart home camera footage. I exported every clip from the past 2 weeks where motion detection had logged during hours she claimed to be out for errands or at the gym. Each clip was saved to a private cloud account she didn't have access to. The birthday day logs were labeled clearly. 10:14 entry, Claire plus Trevor. 1:42 exit, both. 4:03 entry, both. From there I moved to the receipts. The cafe slip from the bedroom dresser, the wine purchase from the kitchen counter, a pair of digital receipts emailed to our shared account from a boutique fitness club, each timestamped on days that matched my growing timeline of her absences. I downloaded the PDFs, printed hard copies, and photographed the physical versions in case anything went missing later. Her suitcase guest had been careless, leaving several items in plain view. I photographed everything. The open case with clothing still folded, a small toiletry kit with initials embossed on the leather, the fitness club key fob with Trevor's name, even the charging cable plugged into the outlet on her side of the bed. Each photo included a slip of paper with that day's date in my handwriting for context. I checked our joint accounts next. I'd grown used to spotting the patterns, 2-person meals in unfamiliar restaurants, cash withdrawals near hotels, but now I had the benefit of specific dates and a name. Sure enough, 2 ATM withdrawals on days she'd blocked her calendar as studio. Both withdrawals were within walking distance of the same boutique hotel I'd passed 100 times without noticing. I also pulled her fitness app logs from our shared health tracking service. She hadn't hidden them well, just renamed certain activities as yoga or run on days when the GPS data showed her stationary for hours in a completely different part of town. I exported every suspicious log, the maps tracing out routes that led not to gyms or parks, but to a narrow side street behind the hotel. While I was at it, I changed the passwords to all shared digital services, our streaming accounts, our smart home dashboard, even the cloud storage tied to our joint photo albums. I didn't want her accessing or deleting anything. The same went for our financials. I disabled the extra card tied to my primary account, froze the joint spending limit, and canceled the auto payments I'd been sending to her relatives' business loans. By the time she stepped out of the shower, I'd already sent an encrypted folder of evidence to my personal email and to a new account only I knew about. I closed the laptop and slid it back into place on the desk before she could see. She glanced at me, towel wrapped around her hair, expression unreadable. "You're quiet," she said. "Just tired," I replied. It was true, but not in the way she thought. The next morning, I took the first formal step. I called my attorney, someone I'd met years earlier during a routine property matter, and scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I told him enough to make my position clear. I need to protect my assets and separate financially before anything else happens. He didn't waste time. By the end of the day, I had a packet of notices ready to send. Formal letters establishing financial separation, revoking her access to the trust accounts my parents had set up, and putting joint assets under temporary restriction pending review. As we worked, I brought up something that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I'd seen Trevor in my kitchen. Claire's brother, Dylan. He'd been increasingly absent from his job at the holding company where I oversaw operations. I suspected the absences might overlap with Claire's trips. It took my attorney less than an hour to walk me through how to pull HR records as part of my role. Sure enough, Dylan's unapproved absences were labeled internally as partner meetings or site visits, and many lined up neatly with the dates and locations on my evidence timeline. Whether he was directly involved or just covering for her, the connection was clear. Before the week ended, I'd quietly initiated an internal review. Badge swipe records, travel reimbursements, project meeting notes, they all started flowing into a secure folder. I didn't tip my hand to Dylan, but I let the HR team know these items were being reviewed for compliance. By Friday, the structure was in place. Evidence cataloged and backed up, financial access severed, legal protections filed, and parallel inquiries launched at work. I hadn't confronted Claire directly since the day of my birthday. She must have felt the shift. My conversations with her were short, polite, stripped of any warmth, but she didn't ask why. Maybe she thought it was the slow burn of a marital rift. Maybe she thought she still had time to steer it back. I knew better. Every step I took was deliberate, calculated to keep her unaware until all the doors had been closed quietly behind her. When I finally did act, there'd be no scrambling to cover tracks, no reclaiming access, no rewriting the sequence of events. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in precision. By the time the legal filings and account freezes were in place, the ripples had already started moving outward. I hadn't gone public, hadn't shouted anything from rooftops or sent accusatory emails, but when you change access codes, suspend cards, and redirect funds, people notice. The first tremor came from the office. The internal review I'd initiated on Dylan was handled quietly, as all good compliance work should be. Badge swipe records showed him entering the building less than half the days he was scheduled over the previous quarter. Expense reports revealed hotel stays he'd listed under regional site visits, all in cities where our company had no operations. When HR matched the dates to our travel claim system, a pattern emerged. On at least 5 occasions, Dylan's supposed meetings coincided with days Claire had blocked out on her calendar as studio or personal. I didn't accuse him directly. Instead, I authorized the compliance team to proceed with a full audit. Bonuses were suspended pending outcome, and his access to project management systems was temporarily revoked. On paper, it was standard protocol. In practice, it signaled to him and to anyone paying attention that something was being watched very closely. The second tremor hit the contractor side. Trevor wasn't just a man in my kitchen. He was employed by a subcontractor bidding for a major facilities tender with our holding company. Normally, his role wouldn't have crossed into my line of sight, but the tender happened to be mid-review when his name came to my attention. I asked procurement to pause the process for a compliance refresh, citing new policy guidelines. This effectively sidelined his employer for months. No accusations, no personal references, just a bureaucratic freeze that any seasoned project manager would recognize as the kiss of death for momentum. By now, Claire's access to the house had already been revoked. The new smart lock system generated unique codes for each user. Hers went inactive on a Tuesday morning. That afternoon, I arranged for a courier to deliver a sealed box containing her essential belongings: clothes, personal documents, a few sentimental items I didn't intend to dispute in the divorce, to an address she'd provided via email. Everything was inventoried, photographed, and signed off by the courier at pickup and drop-off. There would be no accusations about missing items later. Claire's family tried to insert themselves in small ways, at first subtly, then more openly. Her mother called under the pretense of checking on my health. An uncle reached out to clarify some misunderstandings about the trust account freezes. Dylan, predictably, sent a text suggesting we meet man-to-man to avoid unnecessary mess. I ignored the calls. The uncle got a polite but firm reply from my attorney. Dylan's text received no response at all. There was nothing to negotiate. Every measure I'd taken was already in writing, already legal, already locked in place. The court filings for asset protection were granted without pushback, largely because the evidence packages I'd compiled were so thorough. Copies had been lodged with my attorney, my accountant, and in encrypted storage. Even if Claire tried to challenge anything, the documentation would speak for itself. Socially, I kept my tone neutral. I didn't spread stories or seek allies. If someone asked about Claire, I'd say only, "We're separating. It's being handled." The less I said, the more room there was for people to draw their own conclusions. And they did. Within a few weeks, the message was clear to anyone in our circle, personal, professional, or familial, that certain boundaries were no longer open for negotiation. Financial support to Claire's relatives, which had once been generous, was terminated. Joint accounts were inaccessible. Shared service subscriptions were stripped to individual plans. Behind the scenes, I made one last administrative sweep. I removed Claire as an emergency contact at my workplace, rescinded her access to certain insurance benefits that could be severed pre-divorce, and instructed my HR department to block all inquiries from her or her family without legal clearance. The effects were cumulative, not explosive. There was no dramatic public reckoning, just a steady constriction of access and influence. The people who had benefited from proximity to my resources found themselves quietly shut out, doors closing one after another. And yet, I kept it impersonal. I didn't raise my voice, didn't leave angry voicemails, didn't slam doors in anyone's face. My satisfaction came from precision, from the knowledge that every action was justified, documented, and irreversible. Claire must have known the scope of it by then. The few messages she sent in those weeks had a different tone, less defensive, more resigned. The last one simply read, "I hope one day we can talk without lawyers between us." I didn't reply.